So hello everyone and welcome back to our Let's Talk Europe episodes. And today we have a special guest from Finland. Although the guest is not in Finland today, but still. It's Timo Hellenberg, who is a crisis management and security expert and expert of many things, especially what concerns Ukraine, Russia, and all sorts of defense things. So hello, Timo.
Hello, Edvinas. Great to see you.
So what I really wanted to talk today is I had a chance to translate a Finnish article who actually has some interesting thoughts of yours. And the article is on what the West should be doing, in terms of stopping this war in Ukraine and what they are not doing. So one of the thoughts that caught my attention is that the West is sort of thinking, that Russia is trying to occupy, to conquer Ukraine, but you are pointing out that there is a barbaric, aspect of this, and the main reason for them is basically to destroy a competitor. So, can you expand on what you mean that they are not interested in keeping anything, from those territories, but basically just pushing the Ruski Mir onto the neighbor of theirs?
Thank you. This was to the point. The Russian operation against Ukraine, which has now lasted more than 8 years, is based on the historical conceptualization of the Ruski Mir, what you described, but it's also based on the Russian ultra-Orthodox hegemonism, which has been launched in the early 2000s, actually. In the autumn 2000, the pro-Putinist forces, they launched the policy of the Controllable Information Society. And I happened to be there on spot when this initiative was introduced 100 kilometers south from Moscow. So now, more than 20 years after, we see the results of this Russian ultra-Orthodox hegemonism.
Timo, when you explain it as a hegemonism, like let's say in Lithuania, we are always focusing that it's a Russian imperialism.
Yes.
What is the difference between that in your case?
Yes, it's a good question. Imperialism is based on the historic interpretation of the Russian Empire. So all too often we hear that Russia is seeking the old empire statehood, or the old borders, which included actually also Finland and the Baltic countries. So this is all too often this is the mainstream thinking of what's the Russian perceptuation. Hegemonism is a little bit different. It's more close to what you described, the Ruski Mir idealism. So it's the idea that the Orthodox world, the Ruski Orthodox world, would be hegemony vis-a-vis the other realities, like Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish religious beliefs. So basically, I'm talking about a little bit wider issue when I refer to the hegemonism.
Okay, so what you're trying to say is that the competition that they see in Ukraine is not acceptable for them to push on their ultra-Orthodox, historic hegemonism.
Yes, actually, earlier this week, President Medvedev again repeated his kind of list of to-do list. And of course, Kiev was mentioned as the birthplace of the Russian, Kievan Russian.
But that's factually a very questionable statement, because what is Kiev in the 800s have to do with Moscow? Kind of not too much,
Yes, the Russians they look issue from very long perspective. I'm sure you have read my blog, historical blog about this issue, and
we're gonna put a link so everybody can read it. It's a great thing, you know.
Thank you very much. But nevertheless, the Russian perspective it goes well beyond the 1800. It goes to the kind of birth of the Kievan Rus. So they look 700 years back, and also times of the kind of Teutonic times. So there was a huge clash between the Orthodox forces and the Protestant crusaders who came to the Baltic area. So this is the kind of context we are talking about. And of course, in order to respond to this narrative, we need to understand the history as well. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay, so let's get back to Ukraine, and you kind of emphasized in your article that there are some signs of fatigue in the West, like in terms of dealing with this war and the Russian aggression. Can you expand on this?
Yes, I used to live in Kiev from 2011 till 2015. I worked with the Ukrainian Institute of Strategic Studies for a while, and it was evident that the Russian initiative against the Ukrainian government started already right after the 2012 Euro Cup. So we saw the first remarks of this aggressive intervention in the spring of 2013. So unlike the most of the thinkers and writers who state that the Maidan started in November 2013 and continued with the very violent clashes in January, February 2014, I'm stating that the whole process started late 2012 and was intensified with the dialogue between President Yanukovych and Putin during the spring of 2013. So it was a very long process. What is interesting is that it was not only rhetorical initiative, it was also very concrete process of enhancing the infrastructure, not only on the Russian side, but also on Belarus side. So for instance, from Minsk to the Ukrainian border, there were new motorways built between 2013 and 2015. And the question is why to build vast motorways towards the Ukrainian border from north-south if there's no traffic, and where the money came from. So there were very visible signs of the strong preparations going on. And what I'm trying to say here is that Russia has made a decision to proceed with this policy and to have concrete results. And we need to understand that in the West. So when Russia escalates, we shouldn't de-escalate, but we should respond and to find the algorithm for that.
But you're saying that kind of the fatigue kicks in the West approach. So like, can we specify, because some analysts say that, look, the Germans, they're changing their mind and they're supporting Ukraine, although on the other side of the Atlantic, some pro-Trumpian politicians actually are talking quite some serious nonsense. But anyway, where exactly you see like this fatigue in the United West?
It's a bottom line question, and in order to understand, for instance, the German policy on Ukraine, we need to look at the history. We need to look at the German policy on Ukraine not only for past 5 months, but for past 80 years. So what has been the German position on Ukraine already during the Second World War? We know that Germany was fighting against Russia with a different regime, of course, but still, nevertheless, it's the fact that Germany was actively fighting against Russia in 41-43 in the region of Kharkiv, and everybody knows the Battle of Kursk and so forth. So these are the issues which are still affecting the collective mindset of the Germans. And we can't just say that Germany is passive and US is active. We need to look at the historical context. History matters.
So you mean this is a trauma, of like Second World War, and the Germans, what they are considering Ukraine as part of the influence zone of Russia, or what is the actual, I am pretty sure that, behind the closed doors, or when the cameras are not pointing out, you probably heard the versions, how they perceive this Ukrainian, issue.
Yeah, it's probably part of the trauma, but it's also part of the realism. It's called realpolitik. So Germans understand the massive consequences what the previous intervention and effort caused for the Germans. Germans lost only in the Baltic area, in the area of Lithuania to Estonia, more than 30,000 men during the Second World War. So the losses were massive for the participation and intervention. Although we are talking about completely different regime.
Yeah, but Timo, they should understand. They should understand that during the Second World War, actually, there would be no Russia, victory if there was no land lease. And we are talking about a land. We'll get to this topic of land lease, but like the land lease that was there from the States to the Soviets, it was actually like without that, Russia would be nothing. So they actually lost, not to Russians, they lost to the greater powers that were, supplying.
Yes, but on the other hand, Edvinas, we need to look how the Germans interpreted this issue. So not like we do. So of course, when we look from Finnish point of view, we have been from Finland. We have been a battleground between East and West for what it is past more than 1,000 years, and we know what it takes to stay independent in the so-called borderline between the East and West, and what it takes in terms of sacrifices to defend ourselves. And that is one of the reasons why Finland has not been very eager to join NATO, because we think we should rely on our own strength, our own forces in terms of the crisis. But of course, now the world has changed completely, and Finland is seeking the NATO membership. But coming back to the German issue and the West as a whole, so there are different interpretations of this situation. Also for Germans, it is quite evident that they are worried about economy. They are worried about their supply and security of their energy. Same goes most likely with the French position. Just before war, there was a lot of skepticism about involvement in this situation. But my thinking, and I have been proposing very concrete steps very recently in the Finnish media, what to be done.
Yeah, so we can get to that. So I just want to clarify. So you think that in terms of oil and in gas supply, you think that it's possible to get back to business as usual after all, this in 2022?
I don't think there's the way back as we used to have it. So as we recall the previous steps of the Russian regime, being directly involved in the Maidan, being directly involved in the policies of President Yanukovych, being directly involved in the war in Luhansk and Donetsk between 2015 2022, and of course, not to mention about Crimea. So there's no way back what it used to be. The losses are such a massive scale, and the aggression has been stated worldwide at the level of the war crimes. So there's no way back we used to be with our relations with the Russians.
But on the other hand, you still say that the Germans are kind of seeing the economy in terms of supply chain. Do they see some possibility working here with Russia, or how would you explain that to the Westerners? Because for the Scandinavians and Baltics, it's usually easy to understand what are we dealing with, but further west, and especially on the other side of the pond, it's quite a different story.
It's a bottom line question again, Vinas, and I think that there's no clear-cut answer for that. How the world will look after this winter, we have no idea about that. We can only have guesses, and but the fact remains that Russia doesn't disappear; it will remain. And
there is a speculation that Russia. One of the options is the kind of a dissolvement of Russia into smaller territories, because there are nations which are oppressed in current Russian territory, and they are they have a possibility of creating their own countries, and all the other stuff. I'm not even talking about the Kaliningrad and this joke that was going on the internet of how the Czechs are occupying the Kaliningrad. But what is your take here?
I think this is an excellent question, and this is actually my favorite topic. I'm very glad you took this up. One thing is that when we look at the current Federation of Russia, it's a kind of Christmas calendar.
Yeah, but let's start from because the Westerners probably don't even understand there is no federation in Russia. That is just like a camouflage, or like the wording.
Yes, it is. But okay, let's not use the word federation. Let's agree on that. We talk about Russia as an entity. Russia is definitely a collection of different nations, different tribes. And for instance, I give you an example. Ingermanland, Ingria, the area from Narva all the way to the Lake Ladoga, Viborg. Viborg used to be Finnish town, actually, as we know. So this land area was called Ingermanland, Ingria, until 1721. Last year, there was the 300 years anniversary of the New Start Treaty, which was the treaty between Sweden and Russia about this area. So with one signature, Peter the Great took over Ingria, Karelia, and the vast areas of Livonia, current area of Estonia and Latvia. Could Ingermanland be the fourth Baltic country if the history would have been different? And I'm raising this question now in this discussion, which is utmost important. Because the people of Ingria, inkeriläiset, as we say in Finnish, they have their own identity, their own historical context. So where is that now, and how is it going in Ingria with these people? I don't know. I think there's not much left. Many of these people escaped to Finland, but they are keeping their own cultural identity with their own circles. And this is an excellent example. The other example is Karelia, the eastern part of Karelia, which is now part of Russia. Finno-Ugrian nations, the people of Finno-Ugrian tribes, used to live in this heartland of Karelia. All this is now destroyed. During the Stalin time, 1930s, a lot of people were moved out, and the new people were brought in, all the way from Vladivostok, Khabarovsk, Kazan, Komi. They were moved to this area, and these people were taken somewhere else.
So, as I understand, you see a possibility, although you were talking about a small part, of Russian territory in the west, northwest, but like there are also other regions who are, like the Caucasus, area, and further to the east. So this might be a new reality, like a map of new countries, maybe a new nation spring, will blossom in the territory.
I would like to refer to what I said in the very beginning when we started this discussion, was the fact that after the Yeltsin era, Russia was chaotic, and it was very difficult for instance, for Finnish companies to continue their business operations in Russia because the country was in a total turmoil. You remember President Yeltsin pointed out for the governors that take as much independence as you can. Get as independent as you can within your regions. And of
well,
course,
they probably understood it a bit differently, like and we know what they meant.
yes.
They took, but not in terms of a political, but like basically robbed the country.
But that was also, I would say, an opportunity for the people who form the current regime to launch their own policy, and most importantly, to find an argument for centralization, controllable information society. And I remember when this policy was launched, 100 kilometers south from Moscow at the Border Conference Center. I was there myself with a German colleague as a foreign observer. And it was quite something when the organizers stated that during the next months, during the next years, we will take over the local media in Russia, the radio stations, the newspapers. And of course, everybody protested. Why on earth this is going to happen? But the argument was exactly this, that we are going to stabilize the very heterogenic society in order to secure the foreign direct investment. They were very talented to state why they do this. And the argument was that this is only a period of time. This is a kind of short period of time when we come back to the normal.
So they stated it's temporary, and actually it wasn't so temporary.
Yeah. Now, 22 years later, we know it was not temporary. It was the permanent setting, and they went even beyond that, using the same tactics abroad. So we have seen the same tactics of being used all around Europe.
So just to finish with the German approach, recently, and it's always comes, in the media and the social media, that it's let's not get over, joyful, let's look realistically, the NATO and the EU is a complicated issue for Ukrainians. Can you explain why is this so complicated? But because in terms of let's say Ukrainian army, maybe even in 2014 they were quite capable of joining NATO and starting training with the forces together. Because what is stopping here? The West of kind of accepting Ukraine into the Western civilization, let's put it like that.
Because we have to distinct between two different things. One is what we like to have, what we wish, like a Christmas list. And on the other, what's the reality? In 2012, and that was during, of course, President Yanukovych, not many of us know that, for instance, United States and Ukraine had bilateral cooperation to develop the defense capabilities of Ukraine. There were exercises. Ukraine was also extremely active in civil protection areas, and taking action also in the cooperation with the Nordic countries, and they were extremely active in crisis management exercises and so forth. But something happened, and things started to deteriorate. They started to go bad.
Well, it's quite simple, because there were, quite a lot of Russians infiltrated into the government, and if I am not mistaken, even the defense minister was like a Russian citizen at that time of Ukraine.
Well, yes. That was the situation after the elections. Of course, the government was formed, and many of the people in the government were representing the eastern part of the Ukraine. We know the Ukrainian history also. The country was extremely divided until the past events which we have been witnessing for past 8 years, but particularly since the February this year. It was very difficult to unite the country already when it came to the Maidan. So you remember the actions during the Maidan, which I referred earlier. Country was extremely divided, and there was the cultural dividends, there was a religious dividends, there was economic dividends.
But Timo,
yeah.
if we look at the polls, let's say when the independence, like how many Ukrainians voted for the independence in the 90s, like I'm not sure I can find it straight away, in my phone, but basically this eastern part of Ukraine, they were largely in favor of independent Ukraine.
It's true. The biggest problems was not the will to be independent, but there were much larger problems, and one was the corruption at all levels of the society, all levels of the government.
Yeah, but this problem we had like all over Eastern Europe. Like nobody will kind of get offended if we state that like during the 90s the corruption was a problem in Baltic states, in Poland, or like anywhere like these Soviet affiliated countries that were like occupied or not directly occupied in terms of Poland. So this is kind of that was normal for this region of Europe.
I would like to give you one example. I try to answer your brilliant question that, for instance, in October 2013, it was actually 14th of October, I remember that from my birthday. I was walking at the main street of Kiev, Kreshatik, with my dog, and suddenly, from the middle of nowhere, a couple thousand people arrived, and they came with their Humvees, Range Rovers. They had loudspeakers on the rooftop of the vehicles, and we assume there were close to 10,000 people in the city center of Kiev demonstrating. 14th of October 2013. And I asked these guys, what are you demonstrating about? And they said, we are against European Union. And we came from Lviv, from Vinnytsia, Chernihiv, and we are protesting the idea that Ukraine should join the European Union. It was quite amazing.
Let's put in the perspective of the size of the Kiev, and this amount is not big, actually.
It's not big, but now I come to the beef. So I asked them, okay, you are against European Union, and what is your political party, where you come from? And they said, we are right wing, we are Svoboda, and all that. I said,
well,
okay,
we know that some far right, organizations
yes.
have some ideas of, being Switzerland all over Eastern Europe, but like this is ridiculous in terms of, the geographical location.
But Edvinas, now I come to the bottom line of this argument. 1 month after, when Yanukovych did not sign the association agreement in Vilnius summit, they switched the side. They started to protest against the government. So very same people, very same Svoboda switched the side.
So like what happened there?
Well, I think it was the. I'm intended to say that it was the overall frustration of the society against corruption, against governance. It was anti-governance demonstration against everything. And once it didn't work, they switched the side. And then started the Maidan during the events in the late October, late November, very violent clashes at the Independence Square. And I think the last moment to stop this violence was 13th of January 2014, when the first president of Ukraine, Leonid Kravchuk, made a famous speech at Verkhovna Rada stating that both the government and opposition, they have to look to the mirror because the country is at the brink of the civil war. But nobody listened. It seemed nobody had time because they were so busy generating more the violence. And also the West was pretty much blind. So I think it's not only the Ukrainians who need to look back, but it's definitely us here in the West. What did we do? What did we did not do in that moment?
Yes, of course. I mean, yeah, we could like do the whole episode about Germany, but let's let's not
Yes.
focus on that because Germans might get offended for sure. So one of the other things before we get to, to what you were proposing, like in the article I mentioned in the beginning,
Yes.
I want to ask you a few questions before that. So you say that you see no signs of collapse in the in Russia, in terms of like in the media we get usually messages that, well, the things are very complicated there, and it's gonna soon collapse, maybe tomorrow. You say that you don't see any signs of that. Can you still agree with yourself after what mobilization and Kherson operation, and after we see that in Russia Wagner is a separate army, Kadyrov has a separate army, even the large corporations are kind of collecting their own security companies, which might be like a separate armies themselves. So the collapse of Russia, any signs yet, or still no signs?
In 2007, I was requested to evaluate an article from Norwegian Institute of Foreign Affairs, and the title was "Towards Post-Putin Russia," and it's pretty long time ago. This debate has been going on since end of 2000. So we remember the big clashes in Moscow 2008. There were vast area of demonstrations, and demonstrators were violently arrested by the OMON next to the Kremlin. So all this debate that Russia is collapsing and Putin is sick and he's going to die soon, I don't know what to say. This is
well, if we're talking about Putin, he definitely looks a bit different from what he looked like a decade ago.
Well, he looks, but as we can assume, it's not Putin. It's the collective mindset of the Russians. I have read some statistics that 80% of the Russians are supporting this war, and we know from all the violent clashes that the circle of revenge will feed itself. So when there are people dying, the neighbor goes to get involved, and the friends get involved, and by the end of the day, nobody remembers why we are fighting. We just fight to have a revenge. And this is something I'm worried about. And you mentioned these local tribes leaders in Russia. I wouldn't pay too much attention on that. Who is going to replace whom and whose fraction is going to rise? The bottom line question is our own behavior. And when we look, for instance, the missiles which hit the Polish soil, I was pretty surprised about the reactions from the West, because the first reactions were particularly from the US side that this is not the issue of the NATO, and this is the bilateral issue between Poland and whatever it's Russia or Ukraine, even without any investigation, what's the source and cause. So when it comes to this issue, I think we should focus on our own behavior, and particularly having the algorithm. So if there's a strike against the West, any of us, there will be a counter strike. There will be consequences. And if we don't have this algorithm in place, this is only beginning of the very long, dark period of the history.
But obviously, we don't have this algorithm in place at the moment.
Yes, we don't have. And that's why I was very pleased that you were also interested in the historical context. And I think there's so much to be learned from the times of the 1200 until the late 15th.
But Timo, they always come back to the, as you say, most important, thing. Russia is a nuclear country. It wasn't a nuclear country in the 13th century or 19th century. It was easier, well, that's at least what was the point they're trying to make.
So what? So what?
Yeah, I totally agree. But
so what?
But the Westerners, let's put it like that, or like especially the American, let's say, pro-Republican media, they always point out that we are on the brink of atomic, war here and stuff like that. So that's why I'm bringing this up.
Yeah, I know what you are very well describing, but Russia has nuclear weapons, which are most likely more dangerous for themselves than for us, because we know how the Russian maintenance and infrastructure, what is the status of that today. So if I would be Russian, I would be much more worried about their own nuclear weapons than we are at the moment.
Well, like the amount of weapons they have, well, we all should be, concerned and think how to denuclearize Russia as fast as possible. Okay, so you were proposing like some ideas what should be done, like in terms of the war in Ukraine and how to stop Russia. So can you expand on that? Besides weapons, you were saying that there has to be a no-fly zone, and
yes,
that Russia has to be kicked out from UN Security Council and maybe UN like in general, which is a bit more complicated. We'll talk about UN in a bit as well. So how do you see those steps and what should be done?
Edvinas, thank you for that. I have proposed 3 very concrete steps to be taken immediately. And the basis of my arguments is that a legitimate government of Ukraine have requested these issues on their own territory. So when the legitimate government elected within democratic elections is requesting assistance on their own territory, I don't see any difficulty to implement.
Yeah, but we can get back to the same historical, traumas of Germany and thinking of the West that, Ukraine is something else and doesn't matter what they request, we still are like, it's complicated, or let's be realistic, as they say.
I have proposed a non-flight zone from Chernihiv to Mykolaiv, to the western part of Ukraine. And
yeah, but you are saying that who is gonna ensure that there is no fly zone? Obviously, it's not gonna be Ukrainians. So if it's anybody else, it's escalation, as they say.
How can it be escalation if this is activity on the soil and the airspace of the independent country? How can it be escalation? It would be escalation if we would propose non-flight zone to Ingermanland.
I totally agree with you, Timo, but we see that even in terms of weapons supply, they are not sending tanks because it could be an escalation. So where is the logic, behind this?
Well, I'm only talking on my behalf. So I have proposed the non-flight zone to secure the area for civilian evacuation and civilian livelihood from the point of view of humanity. And I have also referred to the United Nations Article 51, which gives all the intergovernmental and political mandates for this activity. If we look Poland today, close to 10 million people have traveled across Poland. 2.5 million people have stayed to look for shelter in Poland. The effects of this war in Poland are already comparable to the direct warfare. So this is also another matter we should consider and we should take into account. So this was the first thing what I proposed, the non-flight zone, and you remember my proposal. The second proposal was the ground forces to secure the assistance deliveries and to have this possibility to support Ukrainians both in Kiev but also in the western part Ukraine, particularly in the areas where most of the evacuees have been coming from the other parts of the country. And the third proposal was to consider the Russian position in the United Nations Security Council, based on the fact that the country was never accepted to the Security Council, but it was the heritage of the Soviet Union, and only the flag was changed. So, of course, you might ask how it is possible that Russia would be taken away from the Security Council, but there's already a kind of pre-case from the Korean War, so that is possible. But of course, we know the Chinese factor, we know the Chinese position. There are also other countries now, part of the benign countries vis-a-vis with the Russian policies. So that might be difficult, but these are the issues which are on the table, and I think they should be taken seriously.
But
what is the value of the Security Council at the moment? I would like somebody to tell me that issue.
Yeah, so what was interesting, what you mentioned in the article, that there is no need for all permanent members to actually agree on this topic. So it's much well, it's not much, but it's easier to maybe get this majority needed from the ones that are not the permanent ones, but like doing like the math, is it possible in your opinion to get this support, and why not even nobody have tried this properly during this 8-9 years, or like at least this active phase of since February 24?
Yeah, there are two arguments when it comes to the proposal regarding the Security Council. The one is that the current state of affairs is not only about Ukraine. This is also about the future of the Security Council. This is also about the functioning of the Security Council and the United Nations as a whole. So it's a kind of question of the principle. When it comes to the voting, it's a technical matter, and it would need 9 permanent members of the Security Council to be in favor of this proposal.
Of course, this is going to be a question which might offend somebody, but do you think that UN in general is serving its purpose, like in the current times? Because there's quite a lot of debate that, although not from the mainstream, that it doesn't look really, like a proper organization which is like representing the world.
I did my doctoral thesis about the United Nations and the functioning of the United Nations long time ago when I was a young guy. And I compared the functioning of the United Nations with the NATO in the crisis management issues. And the result was quite revealing, quite informative.
Disappointing, you mean?
Yes. It's the difficulty of the United Nations is that it's not about operational, tactical level assistance, but it's strategic political level platform. And all too often, this strategic level is hindering the results of the tactical operational level assistance, like we see now with the Security Council. It would be also for the benefit of the Russia that the Security Council would function, because the time will come when Russians themselves will be asking results and assistance. We all know that who will pay the vast cost of the war in Ukraine? Who will pay that? So there will be a time when the Russians will be screaming help and asking the functioning of the Security Council. So it would be a common benefit to fix this issue right now, and like it or
not. To be honest, I heard an opinion from one of the influential let's say, public person that most of the listeners know. I'm talking about Alexei Arestovich. That this UN, like the birth of UN is actually like a Christian value, West value organization. And once you add the other cultures, it doesn't function, because the rest, well, not the rest, but some parts of the world see the human rights and, the other rights quite differently. So maybe it would be much more, functional if we would have like 3 United Nations organizations, and they would like debate each other, and like find agreements for the separate regions of the world. What do you think?
Actually, we have it already. When you look the different organizations within the United Nations, WHO, UNDP, UNESCO, there's an endless amount of UN organizations which are competing against each other in different parts of the world. They are competing about attention of the donors. They are competing about the lucrative contracts, and there's a competition among the staff. So they are all too often the staff members of these key organizations are nominated from the countries which are the biggest donors. So there's a lot of competition already. So I wouldn't be in favor of creating any administrative solutions. We have it already. Rather than that, we would need to simplify the decision making. We should somehow find a rationale between this very complex setting of the intergovernmental and interagency decision making.
Yeah, it's probably easier said than done. Okay, so Timo, let's move to the last part, and what I really liked that you stressed out, in the article, which is also probably a mystery for some of our colleagues that are listening from United States or even the Western Europe, that Russia believes only in force, and response has to be force whenever Russia is trying to do some harm in any region. And it's always good to remember the Turkey, the Erdogan, and how he deals with Putin. They have like shot down Russian airplanes and nothing happened. They weren't, attacked by Russian military directly. Like this is the language that Russia understands. And here we have this Lend-Lease drama, or not even a drama, mystery, maybe like how many months have passed since the Lend-Lease got into place, and the US is still supporting Ukraine on different bases. Why do you think this happens?
So your question is about the heterogeneity of the Western support, if I got it right.
Well, it could be clarified as that.
Yes, I know that you are getting sometimes maybe frustrated about my historical.
No, we all love history. It's absolutely good.
And I know we have a limited time today, but nevertheless, I would like to emphasize that in order to understand everything we talk here today, we need to dig into 1,300 years history of both Russia and Ukraine, and to trace back into the beginnings of the same medieval kingdom called Kievan Rus. So this is the starting point in order even to try to understand the functioning of the Western support and the functioning of impossibility setting between peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. So this is the starting point. The second thing I think is that the fear and the fear among the Western leaders, which is clearly dominating the actions. If the similar approach would have been at place during the old times, the times of the Livonian Confederation, the Livonian War, as we all know that part of the history, Ivan the Terrible and so forth. I wonder if you and me would be here talking about the future of not only Ukraine, but also the future of the Baltic countries. So this is the starting point. And in order to find concrete outcome, solid outcome for this devastating warfare, we need to look our own actions, and we need to go to the mindset of our own leaders rather than focusing what's happening in Russia. That's something we cannot influence. That's something we cannot have a direct impact on at the moment. But instead of that, we can influence our own setting. And for that reason, I have proposed these three things to be taken. One was the non-flight zone to secure the assistance of the Ukrainian civilians in the Ukrainian territory, which is not in the direct warfare zone, by the way. The second thing was the ground clearance. So that means the secured ground corridor all the way from Lviv to Kiev. So to have secured ground corridor secured by the international coalition. And the third thing was the issue of Security Council, to have a rationalistic viewpoint on the functioning of the Security Council and to make this initiative, to launch the initiative, to rationalize it as it should be. And that would be paradoxically also for the benefit of the Russians in the long term. So these three things I put to the table today.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you that these three things probably would solve a majority of the problems. But still, it's interesting to hear your take. Why, let's say, the strongest country on earth is hesitant to lend lease the military equipment, because they signed, they made the framework for that to be possible, and they're hesitant. The U.S. history, we cannot trace back it to the Kiev Rush times. So there might be something else in the heads of our Western leaders, especially. I mean, I'm talking about U.S.
Yes, we have elections coming in our democratic world, democratic countries. We have elections coming in the United States. There was just elections. We have elections coming in Finland as well, and luckily we have the system which functions, and nobody is so unique that couldn't be replaced. But
Timo, if looking at the elections that just happened in the United States, well, we could put an argument that the support of Ukraine, military support of Ukraine, did not sink Democrats, in the election. So they should be more brave after this midterm.
Yes. I very much focus on that as well, and I would like to pay attention on that. But rather than that, I would also like to focus on the Baltic Sea region. So whatever Finland and Sweden will join NATO, and whatever there will be a peace solution in the foreseeable future between the Ukraine and Russia, we still need to consider, and we need to fix the regional security structure at the Baltic Sea. I think one of the issues what we have learned from the war in Ukraine during the past 8 years is that it's all about our own defense. It's all about our regional resilience when it comes to the big confrontation between the East and West. And again, I'm referring to the history that, for instance, the times of the 1500, 1501, when the all-out war broke between Moscow Grand Duchy of Lithuania. There was the time when Ivan, the leader of the Russian forces, started to harass the Hanseatic trade at the Baltic Sea, and also the Livonian Confederation was squeezed heavily. That was the time when both Lithuania and the northern Livonia, the two statehood in the region, were aggressively attacked by both the Pskov and the Moscow and Novgorod. So that was a time when there was a decisive leadership in the region within the Livonian order, the Grand Master of Walter Klettenberg, which I referred quite recently. And there was the counteraction. There was a counteraction, there was a counter force against the force. And like it or not, this is the way it works. And if the other side escalates and the other side de-escalates, we know from the basic mathematics how it goes.
All right, Timo. So I'm pretty sure that everybody who listened carefully got plenty of, food for thoughts. It was a pleasure, and I'm pretty sure that we're gonna ask you to, do a second episode at some foreseeable future. So, Timo, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks everyone who were watching. Please subscribe who is not a subscriber of ours, at Let's Talk Europe YouTube channel, and see you in the next episode.